So welcome to the fourth session. I can't believe it's already the fourth. And we're going to be going through our third bird ID session. Here, click on the right screen. Before I get started, I'd just like to say that I'm joining you this evening from Saskatoon, which is located on Treaty 6 territory, and it encompasses the traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, and Stoney First Nations, as well as the homeland of the Métis. If you happen to be new this evening, my name is Leanne Latchmoy, and I work for an organization called Birds Canada. We're a not-for-profit, and we have a mission to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. And I've been working for Birds Canada for a little while now. I started in 2008 doing summer contract work, and I really do love wetlands, so I'm hoping that some of my enthusiasm catches on with you and you get outside and explore some of these really incredible habitats that some of us are really lucky to be living around, a lot of them, but almost everyone is in a reasonable distance, I think, from a wetland. You just got to go out and take a look. So let's get started. Tonight, we're just going to do the birds and frogs of this week. Last week we did a bit of a review, but I think that took up a bit too much time. And because all of these recordings are posted online, I think I'll skip the review for this week. And that session is going to be recorded. Afterwards, we're going to have some quizzes, we'll do some discussing, and I'll let you know about a field trip that we've got coming up this weekend in Saskatoon. All right, without further ado, let's introduce this week's species. We've got two species of teal, the blue wing and the green wing. We've got two species of grebe. We've got the horned and the eared. We also have the Wilson snipe, black tern, and we've got actually three frogs tonight. One is the spring peeper, and the Treefrogs are an interesting group, which hopefully I have a bit of time to get into later, but we've got the gray treefrog and Cope's gray treefrog, and more on them in a bit. So let's get started with those teal. First on the docket is the blue-winged teal. This is a pretty small dabbling duck. So if you see, a little dabbler next to, say, something large like a mallard, this is going to appear relatively small. They're not very large birds. They're probably about the size of a coot. So the drake has a nice dark bill. Both sexes actually do. And the drake has this beautiful kind of purpley blue head. It's very, very dark with that really bold white crescent in between the bill and the eye. This is going to be one of your go-to field marks for the blue-winged teal, the drakes anyway. So that really big crescent on that kind of dark head. The body is this beautiful kind of tan with like all these sorts of it almost looks like freckles all over the body, and it's got a black and white rump. But that blue right between, or that white right in between the bill and the eye is really going to be your dead giveaway for your blue-winged teal in the dabbling species. In flight, it's going to show this gorgeous powdery blue wing patch, and the speculum, which is that colored portion right over here. It's those secondary flight feathers. It's going to be a mixture of this iridescent green and black. So that is our blue-winged teal drake, a fairly distinctive little duck. The hen, on the other hand, she's going to be hard to tell apart from other small ones, but hopefully with the tips that I'm giving you this evening, you'll get, a little bit more confident in identifying the female ducks. But just want to let you know that don't worry right off the bat about trying to identify all of the brown females that you see. If you're new to ducks and duck watching, focus on the males and learn, the shape, their behavior, and obviously the color patterns, but really the shape and the size you're going to want to focus on, and then start to transfer that to the females that you see in tow with them. So the blue-winged teal hen is going to be another small duck. She's mottled brown overall, like all of the dabbling species. On the face, she's got this dark eye line, and she's got these nice white eye arcs above and below the eye. And she's also got a whitish base of the bill, and overall, those two things are going to make her have what appears to be a lighter colored face. And we'll compare that to the green-winged teal hen in just a second here. But, small duck, she's going to have a dark bill and a lighter face. Those white eye arcs are a really good giveaway, and that pale base to the bill just kind of makes the whole head overall look paler. She also has that powdery blue patch on the wing, and her speculum is mostly just a very, very, very dark green, practically black in almost any context that you'll see it in. But that powdery blue is sometimes visible when she's preening or as she's swimming around. So that is the blue-winged teal. These guys are opportunistic dabblers. They eat a lot of aquatic invertebrates, aquatic vegetation. They'll snack on algae, and they'll also make use of agricultural grain. So they'll get up in the crop fields in the fall and eat some of that spilled grain. And the voice for these guys, it's not super distinctive, but it does have a nice pip, 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 and it's kind of a soft call. Let's play that here. Make sure the volume's up on it. So kind of just light pipping noises is not something that's really going to grab your attention, say, like that northern shoveler does with the sook sook. That's really distinctive. This is just kind of a bit more of a quiet, and it's more something that's going to, attract your attention, and then you'll turn and over and usually see the bird. So use that as a bit of an auditory clue. So got the autoplay on. And this is a species that you're going to see across, the vast majority of North America. So pretty much wherever you're tuning in from this evening, you're probably going to have blue-winged teals in your neighborhood. Okay, now on to our smallest dabbling ducks. This is going to be even smaller than the blue-winged teal. It's not a massive size difference. It's not going to be, a miniature duck next to the blue-winged teal, but it is going to be slightly smaller. And again, definitely smaller than all of the other dabbling ducks that we've covered. So this is a more compact duck. It's got a slightly smaller bill, and it's just, it's got a smaller head overall, steeper forehead, and it just has a more compact look than the blue-winged teal does. The drake is this really gorgeous chestnut head with this, green stripe behind the eye. I often like to think of it as, some sort of eyeshadow or, just bold makeup on the face. And what's really going to be, an important thing to key in on that's visible at great distances is this white spur on that gray flank. That white right there, kind of close, up to on the front end of the body, especially when the duck is swimming around. That white spur is really, really, really going to stand out. And there is going to be no other duck species that has that white spur. So if you write anything to the hard drive for the green-winged teal this evening, it's going to be that white spur kind of far up on the body as the duck is swimming around. The speculum is not quite as spectacular as in the blue-winged teal. We don't have that powdery patch to go along with it, but it's kind of a similar iridescent green and black. This one is going to be bordered above and below with kind of whitish to buffy tan colored bars above and below. Pretty spectacular little duck. He's also got a cream patch on his rump that's bordered in black. It's not quite as starkly brilliant as that white patch. Again, white is a color that reflects all of the light that's coming at it. So even in low light conditions, something that's like a true white is really going to still stand out even in very low light conditions. Now that hen, on the other hand, we were talking about the blue-winged teal hen, who's a small mottled duck. Well, the green-winged teal is as well, but she is going to look darker overall, especially on the face. So this is, again, where that shape comes into play. She's going to be more compact. So if you have actually a couple of hens swimming around together and you get to see them side by side, that's a good time to practice what that shape of that duck looks like. So smaller head, smaller bill, just makes for a more compact looking duck. She's mottled brown overall. She's got a small cream patch over here by the tail that's going to be lacking in the blue wing. But overall, it's that darker face. So there is no white eye arcs. There's no white at the base of the bill. The cap and the eye line are going to be just a bit more dark than in the blue-winged teal. And so at a distance, she's just going to look like a small, more darkly colored mottled brown duck. I know that's getting into the weeds a little bit, but I'm going to arm you with hopefully some knowledge that even if you don't remember in the field, maybe once you're getting confident with your ducks, you can come back and say, hey, I think she had some good tips about those small brown ducks. I did. So focus on the face, and if you can see that white little cream patch by the tail, it's not always super visible, but sometimes you get a good look. That's going to be useful. Also, the speculum in the female here is going to have some of that iridescent green. So if you have that flash of green, there's a good chance that you're going to be having a green-winged teal. You might see it a little bit in the blue-winged teal hen, but it's really going to be much more visible in the green-winged teal. So those are those two together. This is another opportunistic dabbler. Slightly different food preferences. They're going to be going after sedges and grasses, aquatic vegetation, insects and their larvae, crustaceans, and mollusks as well. And the sound is a little bit more distinctive. It's kind of a loud single peep, peep, peep. I'll play that for you here. So that is the sound of that green-winged teal drake, that peep, peep, peep. I like that one. It's short, it's sweet, and it gets your attention looking in the direction that you'll eventually see the bird in. So those are our two teal species. The green-winged teal actually has a very, very broad distribution. You'll notice this with a lot of the ducks. They occur in North America as well as Europe and Asia. So this duck really is going to be seen pretty much anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. It's focusing in on the North American context a little bit. And again, anywhere you're tuning in from, you're likely to be seeing the green-winged teal. Okay, let's compare those two hens side by side here for a second. So the blue-winged teal on top, the green-winged teal on the bottom. Again, that face is overall going to be more compact, and it's going to be darker in the green-winged teal. That blue-winged teal is going to have a lighter face, those eye arcs above and below the eye, the whitish bill of the base, overall making it look like she's got a lighter colored head. The green-winged teal, compact, darker face, that darker eye line, darker cap. There's that cream patch at the rear if you're lucky enough to see that. But those are those two hens side by side. Both of them overall, they're going to be small ducks with dark bills. So if you see, a bunch of ducks, a bunch of females, especially, midsummer floating around a pond, these are going to be the little guys that you're taking a look at. And even if you can't get to the species, just having an idea that it's a dabbling duck, that it's probably one of the teal, you're on your way to learning them better. So don't worry if you don't get to the species right away. I always try to encourage people that you can't always identify everything. Honestly, if these two hens are at a great distance away, chances are that I'm not going to be able to identify them because they're too far. The lighting's not good enough, and I'm satisfied knowing, well, I've got a couple of teal hens out there. It's not always possible to get to an ID, so don't get too hung up on that. Just try your best, get some practice in, and eventually those subtleties will come. And female ducks are definitely one of those more challenging groups. There's lots of folks that have a hard time with them, so don't feel bad if it takes you a little bit. Okay, moving on to something a little bit more brightly colored and obvious, but still two similar species. First off, we've got the horned grebe. It's gonna be a small grebe. This isn't gonna be, large like the redneck grebe like we talked about last week. So it's gonna have a short pointed bill. It's gonna have a relatively flat topped head and this just brilliant red eye. Like all grebes, it's going to look like it's basically lacking a tail. They have just really reduced wispy tail feathers. In both sexes, they're going to have this yellow golden eyebrow. And this can be brighter or more golden, say, in the males, but it's not always evident in a pair which one is the male and which one is the female. So sometimes you'll see a difference, and usually it's the more golden, brightly colored one that's the male, but I've seen plenty of pairs where, they look effectively identical. Otherwise, I've got a black back and a black head. I've got a rufous neck and rufous flanks, and you'll often see them preening their white little belly. So that's when they, go in and pull out loose feathers. And as I mentioned, I think earlier, we've got or in a previous session, grebes will actually eat their own body feathers. And it's thought that they do this to, help digest fish bones. So they will pluck off feathers and eat them. So you'll often see them flashing these white bellies. It's quite cute. Like I said, males are brighter. They're often a little bit larger as well, but it's a subtle difference. If you see them side by side, you might be able to tell, and you might not. These are grebes that you'll find in small ponds, and usually they're just in pairs. They're not a colonial species like we're going to talk about in our eared grebe. So relatively small ponds in pairs, and they're pretty territorial. They also do lots of elaborate courtship displays like we talked about last session with the other grebes. Here's a couple of really nice photos of the penguin dance, as well as below the weed ceremony where they, both dive under and get, what could be used as nesting material, and they will ceremonially rants around their little pond together. It is just the cutest thing. And it's amazing to see, them fluff out those head feathers up here in the penguin dance. It's just incredible that they, do that. They'll bump chests and they'll just kind of, dance around each other. Grebes are really, really interesting to watch. And this is the time of year where they're going to be doing this stuff. So, if you happen to get out, just take the time and sit and maybe watch those grebes in case they do something cool. They're definitely divers. Their legs are really far back on their body. They're made for, getting around underwater really effectively. So they'll eat aquatic insects and larvae. And in the wintertime, they'll eat a bit more fish and crustaceans, but they'll eat that stuff in the summertime as well. And they're on the whole, a fairly silent species in my experience. They'll be a little bit more vocal really early in the breeding season and, a little bit later into the summer, but kind of during the height of it, that kind of June, July, they're actually fairly silent. But I'll play you their kind of raspy, whinny braying. It's like a wimpier version of the red-necked grebe. So they'll make all kinds of little noises like that, and that really kind of raspy, thin, whinny, or braying sound. Definitely not as loud and as carrying as the red-necked grebe. And this is another one that you will find in the Northern Hemisphere. Unfortunately, if you happen to live in Ontario and Quebec, that for whatever reason, they don't seem to like those two provinces. I don't know why. I'm always fascinated why, those distributions are the way they are. And I don't know that anybody really knows, potentially a lack of frequent small ponds on the landscape, but yeah, I'm not sure why that difference is. It's kind of interesting. You're zooming in on that North American context. But, if you're in extreme Western Ontario and westward, you're likely to be seeing horned grebes in a variety of small ponds. The other similarly sized grebe is the eared grebe. So again, it's small, similar in size. It's got another short pointed bill, and it's really got this kind of triangular shaped head. Another one with this bright red eye. Both of the sexes look similar. They've got these wispy yellow plumes behind the eye, so not quite that solid chunk of yellow golden color, but it's more of a wispy feathery thing going on. Otherwise, it's black overall with rufous flanks. They do have a bit of a white belly as well. You'll find these guys in shallow wetlands, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a small wetland, but they like it shallow. They actually don't like it too small because they nest in large colonies. So you'll see these guys usually in, fairly decent sized groups at, when I'm thinking about whenever I see them, there's usually at least 6 or more. I've seen groups as large as, 30 or 40 eared grebes, all nesting really close to one another. Now, those wispy yellow plumes, sometimes they can get wet and they can clump a little bit and look a little bit more like the horned grebe, but they really do have a steep forehead, that peak to their head. Those feathers are often, carried quite high, and it really looks like that kind of equilateral triangle. And you can see this from a great distance. I've spotted them, across lakes where you can't see the golden plumes, you can't see the rusty flanks, you just see a dark bird with a triangular pointy head, and that is your dead giveaway for the eared grebe right there. Here's just some example of the colonial nature of their nesting. They'll nest, quite close to one another. And I've even found them, nesting in colonies with other colonial nesting birds. So in that bottom left photo there, we've got, those eared grebes circled in yellow, but there's also several Franklin's gulls nest just, right next to each other. The two close ones in the bottom right are actually, essentially building off of the similar platform. So it's really interesting to see them, nesting in such close association with another species. They also do elaborate courtship rituals, but I couldn't find any great photos other than this one, which is doing a little bit of the penguin dance. This is another diving species. They'll eat primarily aquatic insects and larvae, small crustaceans. They like brine shrimp. They'll actually get into some of the more salty wetlands out here. They'll eat small fish as well as mollusks. And they have a bit more of a vocal tendency, I find, than the horned grebe. And they make a call that kind of goes, poo-wee-chick, poo-wee-chick. Let's play that. And I find you're more likely to hear that in part because they usually hang out in larger groups. So, if one pair isn't doing it, you're going to have another one that's going to be going and vocalizing. So it's more common, I find, to hear the eared group, and that might just be because they hang out, in larger groups. And this is another one with a distribution that ranges well outside of North America. It's interesting seeing them there year round in South Africa. Pretty fascinating, I think, to me. You're not going to see this species out east if you're in Canada, so you'll have to come to the prairies. I guess you can get into the mountains as well, but I always try to sell the prairies because they're absolutely beautiful. But definitely have a lot of eared grebes out here, and they're pretty cute little birds. So come on out and visit us if you don't already live here. Okay, let's compare those two side by side. So we got the horned grebe and the eared grebe. Horned grebe has a more flat-topped head. It doesn't have that big, steep forehead. The eared grebe definitely has that triangular, pointy head. What is that? An equilateral triangle, I think, with the equidistant sides on it. So, definitely has a more triangular head. The horned grebe has a solid yellow patch versus the wispy plumes of the eared grebe. And, the behavior and where you find the species is going to be a helpful clue as well. The horned grebe is going to be found in pairs on small ponds, and the eared grebe is going to be found in groups, shallow bodies of water, potentially large bodies of water, but, still some relatively small bodies of water as well. But almost always you're going to be finding them in larger groups. And just to drive that point home about the head shape, if all you've got is the silhouetted bird, even from a great distance, you can't see any other markings on it, that head shape, that really steep forehead and that triangular pointed, shape to it overall is really going to be indicative of the eared grebe. Horned grebe has a much flatter top head. Okay, another species that we're going to be covering is the Wilson's snipe. Now, you may know this from its previous name if you have an old field guide or if you've been doing bird watching for a while as the common snipe. It was actually split from the European species, so that one retained the common snipe name, and we got the Wilson's snipe. This is a medium-sized shorebird. It's got quite a long, straight bill. It's got a large head on a short neck, and it's got a really chunky body size. And, compared to the rest of its head, it's got a rather large eye that's quite, set far back on the head compared to most species. It's kind of like, dead in the center. And this actually gives them binocular vision both forward and backwards. So there is no sneaking up on this bird. You can't walk up on it from behind and expect it to not see you. It can see you quite well given the location of those large eyes on its head. I always find that kind of fascinating. They look a little bit alien-like. But they definitely look like they have no neck for the most part. It looks like somebody has a great big ball and they scooped an ice cream cone, or, ball of ice cream on top, and it's just, splat right on there. There's your head. Both sexes look similar. They're quite cryptic. They're both mottled brown. They have pale buffy or tan stripes down the back, which you can see in the bottom left here quite nicely. and they've got a striped head as well. It's really going to be a shape and habitat thing that you're going to be focusing in on with the species, as well as the call. They're actually quite vocal. So you'll find them in shallow wetlands and areas that just kind of have damp soil habitats, those wet meadows, which are still wetlands, but they don't necessarily need a ton of open water or anything. You can find them, just in those damp, moist soil environments because they use that long bill to probe for stuff under the muck. They've actually got really sensitive bills. They've got, all sorts of sensors on the outside of them that allow them to feel, which is actually kind of cool. So they do a lot of probing in wet soil, mud, or shallow water, and they're doing this to get after larval insects, earthworms, crustaceans, and mollusks. And what's interesting is one of the most common and distinctive, songs or displays that this bird gives is the winnowing flight display. And it's not actually a vocalization that the bird makes, it's actually a physical sound. So in this bottom left photo here, we've got these, you see these outer tail feathers that are just kind of, not with the rest of the tail. When the bird gets up high and it dives down at a quick pace, the wind rushing through those feathers makes kind of this haunting, winnowy noise, which is, I think, really fascinating. I always think it's interesting when birds have distinctive sounds that they don't actually make with their voices. So let's hear that. And so this is going to be a sound that you would hear moving around. If you're out there in a wetland, it's going to be coming at you from different locations as the bird goes through its flight display and it flies around. Can you imagine the bird diving, in the sky every time it makes that noise? It's pretty neat, and it's so cool if you've got multiple of them, in an area, because you can just hear it all around you. Another call that they'll give is a kek 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 call, it sounds sort of like a squeaky wheel, and it's given, quite regularly at regular intervals. This they'll do usually from a perch, either, on a fence post or on the ground, and it's a squeaky wheel kind of noise. So that's the kek 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 call of the Wilson's snipe. And this is one that you will definitely see no matter where you are in Canada, excluding some of those far northern areas. So Wilson snipe are going to be around. Get out there, dawn and dusk. They're quite active, but you can hear them a fair bit during the day as well. So that's our Wilson's snipe. And last but not least for our birds this evening, we've also got the black tern. This has to be my favorite tern. Terns are related to gulls, but they're kind of the sleeker, more elegant cousins. And I find there is no more sleeker or elegant cousin than the black tern. They've got a straight black bill, these long, narrow wings, and both sexes have this just jet black body, the head, the body, all black, paired with these silvery wings and back and this white tail. It makes such a beautiful combination. They're so elegant, and they have this kind of buoyant, erratic flight above the water that I find that they kind of look like butterflies, like these large silvery and black butterflies just kind of floating above a wetland. They nest colonially, and they will make their nests and just these floating mats of some of the most precarious nests that you've ever seen. They're really susceptible to, waves, and if they happen to be nesting in a larger water body on the edge of it, if there is wake from boats, these nests are super susceptible to that because they're in damp vegetation almost at the water line. So kind of a little bit of a precarious situation for them there, but because it's floating, it does have a little bit of, slack in terms of, oh, is there a big rain event or is the water drying down? The nest can float up or float down along with that, but wave action is a little bit tougher on them. And they definitely forage also in wetlands. And to do this, they'll fly low over it and they'll just kind of like pick stuff off of the surface. They'll go after insects, small fish, snails, small frogs, and little tadpoles, kind of anything that they can grab off of the surface. They're not going to do those spectacular splash dives that some of the other terns are known for. Those kind of gingerly go and gently pick stuff off of the wetland. And they'll actually fly quite a ways to get after food. I have a colleague that has done some work with black terns, and she put geolocators on these species and got a few back, and some of them were flying as far as I think 70-80 kilometers away to get after some food. So they will come from a long ways off. And I often find that they come in groups to forage. Sometimes you'll be standing there at a wetland and all of a sudden there's 2 or 3 black terns that just seem to have showed up out of nowhere, and they'll cruise around, they'll check it out, they'll pick it off, and then suddenly you'll turn around and be like, hey, all those black terns are gone, and they're just heading out on large foraging flights. So they'll pick off, they'll fly, looking down, scouting for anything yummy to eat. And they have these kind of harsh squawks. Sort of sounds like a squeaky toy that's like really rough sounding. I'll just play it for you. So just a lot of harsh squawks there. And if you noticed, if you've been tuning in, we've got a yellow-headed blackbird singing in the background of that. And at the very end, there was a coot that started doing a couple of little pop, pop, pops. It's always fun when you can start to pick up on stuff in the background of those recordings. So that was our black tern, that kind of harsh, squawky, oops, I guess I've got it set to autoplay. And this is a species that honestly, before, getting this workshop material together, I didn't know was also found in Europe and Asia. So that is news to me, and, goes to show that you can always be learning more about birds. So here we have it. Let's take a look at that North American distribution, and you'll see them in a fair bit of North America, kind of centrally located. There's a lot of them out here on the prairies, but I have run into a fair bit as well in southern Ontario when I did some marsh bird surveys out there. And that is our black tern. Okay, now for our amphibians. So both of these, the ones that we're going to cover today, are a bit more eastern in their distribution. In the prairie context, you'll be getting these in Manitoba and a few different locations. So first we have the spring peeper, and this is a teeny tiny little frog. At its largest, it gets to about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters. So this is a teeny tiny little frog, and it's got like a darker X on its back. The body color is quite variable, as you're probably getting to know with all of these frogs that we're going through. It can be tan, it could be brown, green, and gray, and they do have apparently some limited ability to help, change that coloration a little bit like a chameleon. They've got banded legs, but that X on the back and the teeny tiny little size is going to be helpful for you. They're found on around wooded ponds on vegetation, so they really like to be, stuck to plant matter. I often find them tucked on little leaves, and they have an alarmingly loud noise for such a small frog. You kind of expect it to be coming from something much larger. And if you're familiar, if you live in the area where this species is found, this is going to be a sound that is going to be familiar to you because it's just so ubiquitous. So the kind of this peep, 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 and often you'll get lots of them going at the same time, and you'll get this full chorus of just this amazing peeping noise. I've had friends, make recordings and send it to say, what insect, what bird is this? And I tell them it's a tiny frog, and everyone's always blown away. So here goes. Here is the spring peeper. So that's several of them all going at the same time. That is a pretty good chorus. We actually did some work here in Saskatchewan for the Saskatchewan Breeding Bird Atlas, and in 2021 we actually had a bunch of recordings in the northern boreal forest, kind of, closer to Manitoba, and we had a bunch of spring peepers on there. So I think some of it is, difficult to access locations and, weird times of day. So those range maps are, usually you take them with a grain of salt because it's not always well defined and there's not always people out looking for them in every place, especially in somewhere like, the Canadian boreal forest, which is large and relatively hostile to movement, especially in the summertime if you've ever been. Anyway, so that is our spring peeper. Nice, cute, tiny little frog. And now we have the tree frog. So we have the gray and the Copes's gray tree frog. This is a small to medium species. Oh, I guess forgot to write the length. It's a few inches. That can get up to a couple of inches long, like I think about 2 to 3 inches. Still relatively small. The body color is just incredibly variable, from stripes to no stripes, and these ones can actually change their body color much like a chameleon. It's a slower effect than a chameleon's, but they do have the ability to moderate that body color based on their surroundings. One of the things to look for is the really enlarged toe pads. They're also going to be clinging to vegetation or, say, the sides of buildings if you happen to have them near your home. And these guys also breed in these wooded ponds. And what's fascinating about these two species is that, I'm going to throw some biology at you, but so most species are, they have two sets of each chromosome, and we're like that, and the Copes's gray tree frog is like that. For whatever reason, amphibians can sometimes have multiple sets of these chromosomes, and that's what happened with the gray tree frog. It's genetically identical to the Copes's gray tree frog, except it has 4 copies of each chromosome, and not really sure why or how that happens, but and they're able to tolerate it fine, but it makes it so that they can't interbreed then with the other Copeses, and if they do, they usually don't make it to adulthood or have very, very reduced fertility. So it's an interesting case where you've got these two species, and visually they are identical. You can't tell them apart by looking at them, but they do have a difference in their call. But otherwise, other than that, having extra copies of those chromosomes, otherwise they're genetically identical, which is just really strange to me. Coming from a bird world, I'm not, super versed in amphibians, so learning about that, I thought that was just really, really wild. So nearly the same thing. If you see them in the hand, unless you happen to be in a range where gray is not known to occur, it's the only way to tell them apart is by the call. So the regular gray tree frog has a call that sounds kind of like a brrr, and it's slower. You can hear the pulses in the gray tree frog. In the Copeses, it's more buzzy. Those notes are much closer together. Both of them have a relatively flat pitch, so it doesn't really rise or fall. It's kind of just a short noise. Now I'll play the gray tree frog for you first. You can sort of hear those pulses in it. Versus the Copes, which is a more buzzy, still a flat pitch, but it's the pulses are closer together and you can't really tell the pulses apart. Play the gray again. So slower, more of a whir, versus the more buzzy of the Copes. And if you're not sure, going to be okay to just say you've got a tree frog species, because if you were to just see it in the hand, pretty much anywhere in Canada, you're not likely going to be able to say it's one or the other unless you hear it calling, and they do sound fairly similar. Now, I actually was able to dig up a recording that we made as part of some other work in Manitoba, and we've actually got Boreal chorus frog and Cope's gray tree frog calling one after the other in the same recording. So this is an example of a spectrogram, and we do a lot of bioacoustics work in our office. And when we're listening to audio recordings of bird sounds, we pull it up through a computer program and we look at the spectrogram. And a spectrogram is an X and Y plot. So we've got frequency on the Y axis and we've got time on the X axis. And those darker colors that you're seeing are the vocalization. So the brighter the color, the louder the vocalization. But it allows you to see differences in pitch. So the higher the frequency, the higher pitch. And you can see, does it rise? Does it fall? Some of them have really distinctive signatures. So if you've done this a lot, you can actually open up a recording and already know a lot of the species that you're going to be hearing. So here's an example. I've actually made a little video of this. We've got the Boreal chorus frog here. Remember, that one sounds like as if you were running your fingernail or your thumbnail over the teeth of a comb. So it kind of versus the Cope's gray tree frog, which you can see is a really flat frequency. It doesn't rise or fall, and it's definitely quite buzzy. So let's play that. Oh, and just so you know, there's some crickets going in the background. So that's what these little notes are. So you've got that kind of, fingernail, thumbnail going over the teeth of a comb for your Boreal chorus frog, and then that kind of buzzy kind of burr of your Cope's gray tree frog. So I'll play that one again for you. So sometimes looking at the sound that way really helps you to, visually see, is it rising? Is it falling? And I'll probably try to incorporate some more of these in some of the review sessions as we go over, comparing different species. But I just came across this recording today with, these two species is almost the only thing going. So I thought it was a really nice comparison for you for the Boreal chorus and the Cope's gray tree frog. Okay. And that's it for our species today. Let's do a quick review of our bird sounds. We've got the blue-winged teal, which makes a soft pip, pip, pip. And that drake has that really nice white crescent in the face. It's a very, very big crescent. There is a diving species that has a crescent, but the dabbling one that has the white crescent is a blue-winged teal. And the crescent on the common goldeneye, which is another species that has a crescent, it's much smaller. It's not as all-encompassing on the face as the blue-winged teal. Our green-winged teal, again, has that white spur right there, and that's going to be absolutely diagnostic for your green-winged teal. And that's got a louder beep, beep. We've got our grebes. Today we had the horned grebe and the eared grebe. The horned grebe has a flatter head. The eared grebe really has that triangular pointy head. We've got wispy plumes for the eared and solid color, solid yellow golden color on the horned grebe. And the horned grebe does a raspy, whinny braying sound. It really sounds like it's forcing it out there. And the eared grebe does a little poo-wee-chick, poo-wee-chick. The Wilson snipe does that winnowing flight display where the tail feathers are being moved by the wind in its steep dive. And that's going to be a neat one because that's going to be a sound that's coming from above. And they also do a keck, keck, keck like a squeaky wheel from a perch or on the ground. And our black tern does these harsh squawky noises. Okay, and last but not least, we've got our frog sounds. We've got the spring peeper with its very loud peep, peep, peeps. And our two tree frogs, the gray tree frog, which has, you can hear the pulses in it, has a flat pitch. And I see as Doug has corrected me, tetraploidy. I forgot the term for it. So that's the term for having those 4 sets of chromosomes. Strange critters. Those lovely whirring noises. And the copes, which is more of a buzzy burr. And that wraps it up for this evening. My name is Leanne Latchmore. You can reach me at skatlas@birdscanada.org. You can visit the MarshWatch website and take a look at all of the quiz material. The quiz material is often a little bit different than what we do after the sessions. So I encourage you to go ahead, use it as a learning experience. I'm not looking to, have them graded. It's more for you to help you go through and learn them. If you were to go through and do the test again, let's say you didn't do great the first time, you take it again and you find that you've done better because by going through it, you've learned a little bit. So, use them as a learning resource and a kind of a fun way to test it out. You can reach out to Birds Canada on all of the socials. And a big thank you to our supporters at the Manitoba Fish and Wildlife Enhancement Fund, as well as the Government of Canada for sponsoring our work.